Hey everybody! Koricon Nala here, and this is my review of It, which was directed by Andy Muschietti. I hope I pronounced that right. And written by three writers. They worked really well together. So I did like the movie. And I thought the writing was a very strong aspect of it. Now, it is based on a Stephen King book. Everybody knows that. And Stephen King is a great writer, but there's a lot of differences from the book to the movie. I did not read the book, but I've been told so many different differences that were changed that I feel like I've read the book. But basically, I think all of the major changes that they did from the book to the movie made sense, worked with the story they were telling in the movie, and were changes that most likely should have been done. It looks like the stuff that they changed needed to be changed. There's a couple of things that, or there was like one or two things that I've heard of that I think maybe didn't need to be changed. But I don't want to get into any spoilers on this. The main cast were great. All of them were great. There, with the kids, there were a couple of moments where some lines just didn't come off quite right, but they're kids, so you're not going to get perfect acting out of kids. However, for the most part, they were really, really good. For me, the standout though was Finn Wolfhard, who plays Mike on Stranger Things, and you'll see a lot of stuff very similar to Stranger Things in that in the book it took place in the 1950s. This one they updated it to the late 80s, which I think worked really well. For one, you're kind of playing on the popularity of Stranger Things and you're hitting that 80s nostalgia. However, if you think about it, when the book came out in the early 80s, the 50s was 30 years earlier. If we make the movie for today, then you want the story to go back 30 years earlier. So for something that came out today, you would want to make it in the 80s. If it's in the 50s, it's a little too distant for especially for some of the younger, but even for people my age it would be a little bit too distant. But if you make it the 80s, you hit the nostalgia for all of us, and the younger people have more of a reference. So I think it was a very good idea to kind of update it from the 50s to the late 80s. Plus, the 80s had some great nostalgia feels in there. You still didn't have a lot of technology, so a lot of the things that happened in the book from the 50s could still happen in the 80s because they didn't have smartphones and everything else. The story itself, now, this is a horror movie, but, and I don't really get scared at horror movies, so I've been trying to think about how I want to explain it, since I don't really get that scared or terrified myself. There are some things in this movie that might give people a nightmare or make them think twice about a dark corner, but not anything like The Ring. You know, at the end of The Ring, when she comes out of the TV, that's something that made people think about being scared of that for a long time, where they don't want to see a TV with just fuzz on it. In It, they're playing on the individual fears of the children. So it's not really our fears, but they do a great job of showcasing these individual kids and their individual fears and how those fears play on the kids. I think one or two of the kids, the fear, they didn't play it strong enough, or it didn't come off on screen quite right, but it was still cinematically it looked great. It's just maybe it didn't work as well with the timing, where it didn't have that drawn suspense. Now, for the film as an overall, it did. It had that suspense, and they spent a lot of time on the children. So one of the things about Stephen King stories is a lot of rich character development. And it's something that I think a lot of horror movies and even action movies and some sci-fis don't have, is they don't have that rich character development. But this movie does. So you get to spend time with these kids. You get background on each one. They don't waste any time. Every scene has something to do with one of the kids, whether it be their current story characterization, their backstory, their fear, whatever. They don't waste any time. So when you get to the part with Pennywise, you feel for the kids, like you're rooting for them. Now, Pennywise, Bill Skarsgård, he did a great job. Everyone's going to compare him to Tim Curry because Tim Curry is the iconic Pennywise, the only person to play him, and did a great job in a bad movie. The It miniseries was not good.
Kiss me, fat boy.
His portrayal of Pennywise is iconic. It's great. So one of the things I was worried about when they announced the movie is whoever they got, is he just going to do an imitation of Tim Curry? And thankfully we didn't. He didn't do that. Bill Skarsgård did his own thing, but it was still within character, and he was dark. Like, he was creepy. He was unsettling. One of the things that I liked was the director said that he wanted to do this thing with his eyes, where one eye would look at the camera and the other eye would be looking at the kid or whoever he's talking to. But apparently they didn't have to do that in post-production. Bill Skarsgård can actually do that with his eyes. He can move one of them slightly off. So in every scene that Pennywise is looking towards the camera, if he's talking to someone, one eye is looking right at the camera and the other eye is focused on the person that he's talking to. So in a way, Pennywise is looking straight at you as the audience. And it gives this, it's a little detail. If you're not looking for it, you may not even notice it. But it does give this like subconscious unsettling to his character. And I loved those little things. And that's the thing that really shined about this movie, is these writers and the director, they spent a lot of time on the little details. And that's how you can see the difference between a good movie and a bad or an okay movie, is how much they focus on the little details. Now, not to the point where you're ruining the story. First, you have a good, strong story. But once you have your strong story, then look at the little details that don't take any time away from the story itself, things that you can do in frame during that time period. So things like the eyes. Another thing would be, you would see things in the background. So like when Ben was looking at the history of Derry, you have the kind of creepy librarian, and she's out of focus in the background, but you can tell that she's like, the music kind of comes, Pennywise is around there somewhere. And the librarian is just standing in the background and staring right at Ben and the camera. Not saying a word, just standing there with a slight smile. And it is so unsettling. It's creepy as hell. And then they show the balloon go by. But those little teeny things, that there's a lot of Easter eggs, I think, that you could watch this movie multiple times and pick up small details every time you watch it, which I really want to go see it again, because I want to see what other things I pick up that I missed the first time I watched it. All in all, I loved the movie. I thought they did a good job with the characterization. The cinematography was on point. Everything was well framed and well planned out. They knew exactly where they wanted to go with it. The kids were endearing. You loved the characters. Finn Wolfhard was my favorite character, because he reminded me of some kids that I grew up with. Me a little bit. I'm kind of a mix between Richie and Ben. the fat kid that also talks smack. But uh, Richie's character, Richie, was foul mouthed, joker, never stopped talking. I loved his character, and Finn did such a good job with him. I'm glad that they cast him in it, even though he was in Stranger Things. They gave him some really thick glasses, looks way different than he did in Stranger Things. So if they tried to make him look exactly like he did in Stranger Things, it would be weird, but they didn't do that. So thankfully, he does a great job. I'm impressed with Pennywise. I'm impressed with the kids. The adults in the movie, there's no spoilers here, but the adults are unsettling, and they show that in the trailers.
My grandfather thinks this town is cursed. That all the bad things that happen in this town are because of one thing. An evil thing.
The town is kind of cursed because Pennywise has been there for a long time, like hundreds of years. And so you can think of it as like Pennywise has been kind of like slowly ruining the town. Like there's this kind of undercurrent of, gross or disgusting something that people can't really put their finger on, but it changes people over time. And the longer you're in it, the more gross and disgusting you become as a person. So you can kind of feel that throughout the town with the adults, that they've been there a long time, and the fact that Pennywise is there and this kind of depressing grossness that's surrounding the town kind of, changed their personality and made them kind of be darker as adults. I liked that. I really did. In some cases in the movie, it's really dark, really dark. I'm surprised that they went in some directions that they did. I'm glad the movie is rated R so that they could do those things. I liked that they did a lot of things practically. So even though they did use CGI at times, there were a lot of stuff that they did in frame, practical effects, and then they used CG to highlight it or make it a little bit more crazy. And then there's some scenes you have to do with CGI because it just wouldn't look right if you did it practically. But they use CGI as little as possible. And some of those moments you could tell, you're like, CGI. But that was like maybe 2 or 3 times. The rest of it was fine. And it looked great. Scary. I loved it. I want to see it again. So I'm going to give this a grade of an A-. But what did you guys think? Did you see it? Comment below and let me know your thoughts on it. I am excited for Chapter 2, except that the miniseries, and from what I hear on the book, the second half is not good. The part when they're adults is not good. So, but I have faith in these writers because the changes they made for this movie were good changes. And that's not easy to say. Most of the time when screenwriters change something from the novel, it's the wrong thing to change. And then everybody's upset that you should have just followed the source material because it was better. In this case, the changes were better. Now, Stephen King did come out and say that when he wrote it, he was pretty much high on cocaine. It was written by Stephen King and cocaine, is what he said. So I think the changes that they made for the movie were for the best. Kind of take out some of those cocaine high elements. So that's good. And I'm hoping that they kind of fix the second half and do a great job, because whatever changes they make, I'm probably not going to be mad at. And seeing what they did with this movie, I think they'll do a good job. But let me know what you guys think about it. Did you see it? Did you see the original miniseries? Did you read the books? Are there things from the books that you wish they had kept in? Are you happy with the changes they made? Let me know your thoughts. If you're on Vidme, upvote this, give me a follow and share it around. And if you're on YouTube, like, share, subscribe. Tell your friends. And I will see you in the next video.